It's great to be in the SEC. Welcome to the SEC Recap Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Warren. You can find me on Twitter at SEC Recap. Every week, covering the action around the SEC. If you love all things Southeastern Conference, the SEC Recap is where you want to be. So like, subscribe, get notified for new episodes each week. Let's get into it. Week 2 did not disappoint for action. Some more excited than others. Some fans, fair amount of heartbreak. Conference play, Kentucky knocked off Florida in the Swamp. Arkansas dominated South Carolina at Fayetteville. And in non-conference, SEC went 7-3 over the weekend. 3 losses belonging to Vandy, Mizzou, and as everybody's aware, Texas A&M. Alabama just hanging on to win in Austin by 1 point. Got 8 SEC teams now in the AP Top 25. The biggest move, Texas A&M falling 18 spots from number 6 to number 24 after that embarrassing home loss to underdog Appalachian State. We're an 18.5 point dog. In the East standings, Kentucky on top with that conference win on the road at Florida, followed by Georgia, Tennessee, and then I guess technically Vanderbilt, Missouri, and then Florida, South Carolina closing out the bottom of the SEC East standings. Over in the West, Arkansas at the number 1 spot with that conference win over South Carolina, followed by Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, LSU, and Texas A&M. Up next, let's hit the huddle with some quick thoughts, takeaways for each team following this crazy weekend of college football.
Come on, huddle up.
Kentucky at Florida. Man, I got this one completely wrong. I thought this would be a battle of the QBs. I thought both QBs would be way more effective running the ball. Kentucky had Richardson completely bottled up. Defense was swarming to the ball. They did not let him get outside. I think that was the key to victory. Will Levis had to throw for a ton of yards. Didn't really utilize Tavion Robinson. That kind of surprised me. He had such a big-time game in week 1. I thought he would be more of a factor there in the Swamp. But regardless, they got it done without him. They used Dane Key, had a big-time touchdown. That being said, this was really a defensive effort by Kentucky. I still don't think the offense looks that great, despite Levis playing really well, particularly through the air. They really need a running back to step up without Chris Rodriguez there. And until they do, I don't know. It just looks like they're going to continue to struggle to run the ball and have to do everything through the air. I'm just not sure how well they're going to be able to match up versus teams like Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Tennessee without a solid ground game. Georgia still looks like the best team, not just in the SEC, but in the country. They could have run the score up on Samford, but they didn't. Classy move, in my opinion, by Kirby Smart. 15 different receivers caught passes in this game, and 2 backup QBs saw at least 1 snap. Georgia basically just flexed their depth in this 33-0 shutdown. Just not a lot else to say here for Georgia. They look like the number 1 team in the country, and so far, I think it's no question. Tennessee Vols, my Tennessee Vols, slinging what I call Big D defense, that is. I think that defense pretty much put to rest week 1 doubters who said that Tennessee would struggle to affect a quarterback this season. Some stats for you from the Pitt game. How about 16 QB hurries? They were all over the quarterbacks, not just Keaton Slovis, but Nick Patty when he had to come in after Slovis went down after a rough strip sack by Tyler Barron. They also had 4 passes defended and 4 sacks, including that strip sack. I think when it mattered most, that defense stepped up when the offense was stalling, and the Vols got it done in overtime, 34-27. It wasn't pretty. In fact, it looked like the Vols were basically giving that game away through pretty much all of the second half. But the Vols hung in there. They got it done. Credit to Josh Heupel and the Vols for that top 25 win on the road. Oh, Vanderbilt coming back to earth a little bit after those first 2 weeks on the road at Hawaii and then versus Elon. I mean, they did score in all 4 quarters of this game, but, Wake Forest having Sam Hartman back, they put up 451 on the Commodores in what I'm calling a 45-25 wake-up call in Nashville. I'm optimistic that Vandy can maybe squeak out another win or 2 this season. I like Mike Wright. I think he's a good player. They have a really tough road to hoe there at Vanderbilt, especially when it comes to SEC play. Oh man, Missouri. On my scale of 1 to infinite toilet emojis, Missouri's getting 1 toilet emoji, and they probably deserve more, but that's what they were versus Kansas State, losing 42-12 on the road. This was an offensive nightmare for the Tigers. And 6 of their points came literally at the end of the game with 0 seconds remaining in regulation play on a walk-off touchdown. Like, I don't even know what to think here. Year number 3 under Eli Drinkowitz, and this team has no identity on offense or really defense for that matter. I mean, what can you say? 4 consecutive offensive drives ended in interceptions in that game. It's just not pretty. Toilet emoji, toilet emoji, toilet emoji. Florida, I think the Anthony Richardson for Heisman campaign got a lot quieter this weekend. This is a big 180 in the other direction for Florida after that Utah upset, and it just makes me believe that we kind of jumped on the hype train too quickly with Florida. I'm not sure that Utah was really a preseason number 7, or, what is preseason number 7 anyway? Preseason number 7 is just as good as preseason number 25. I think you know who the top 3 or 4 always are, and then 5 through 25, it's, it could be any one of about 30 teams. So I think Utah was a little overrated to start the season. I don't think Florida should have jumped as high as 12, although I understand why they did. So, there's a lot of talent on this roster, but I think a lot of inexperience in big time games, although they, Anthony Richardson really kind of carried that win versus Utah. Kentucky just exposed some of the weaknesses in Florida, some of the inexperience at receiver, and really limiting what Anthony Richardson can do with his legs. Kind of made Florida one-dimensional and just too easy to shut down, in my opinion. South Carolina. All we heard all offseason was how picking up Spencer Rattler at quarterback was going to be the turning point for this team. And just through 2 weeks, it hasn't been. To put it into perspective, I pulled up some numbers from last season through 2 games and compared them to this season. Not that it's really this simple, but it helps paint the picture, and I think kind of put into perspective that I don't think there's been as much growth from last year to this year offensively, despite adding Rattler and Stogner. So through 2 games last season, South Carolina had 764 yards of total offense, which was an average of 5.5 yards per play, 3 fumbles, and 1 interception. Through 2 games this season, they have 722 yards of total offense. So about 42 yards less total offense, averaging 5.27 yards a play compared to 5.5 last year. 5 fumbles. Now, only 2 of those I think were lost, but still 5 fumbles and 3 interceptions. The run game has been virtually non-existent. Just 2 yards a carry on average. It just makes me wonder, is this coaching staff all hype and very little substance? Don't get me wrong. I think South Carolina can be better than what they've been. But last year you were playing with a quarterback who wasn't even supposed to be quarterback. Zeb Noland, he was like a grad assistant who had a year of eligibility left, and they put a jersey on him and, gave him the playbook and told him to get out there. You brought in Spencer Rattler this year, who has a ton of experience at the Power 5 level to make a difference, to be your difference maker, to be the great equalizer offensively. And through the first 2 weeks, it is just slightly regressed from last year. So I don't know what that really comes down to other than the coaching. I know there's a few offensive line issues, but man, Shane Beamer is a great special teams coach. South Carolina special teams can always kind of surprise you if you're not ready for it. But I do wonder if he's really cut out to be the head coach. I think he makes a lot of people feel good. I think the players like him. I think the fans like him. But it takes a little bit more to win football games. I just don't think they're really close to challenging in the SEC East. Over in the West, I think Arkansas could legitimately be the unquestioned second best team in the West. They have some depth concerns defensively, but those guys are playing really good football. Rocket Sanders looks like an all-conference RB. KJ Jefferson is in total control of that offense. That SEC schedule, which, going into the season, a lot of people were saying they have a really tough schedule, but I don't know. After week 2, that manhandling of South Carolina, that SEC schedule looks a lot more manageable than I think a lot of us gave it credit for. Oh, Alabama. I'm glad Alabama came out with the win in Austin because it's better for the SEC. But make no mistake, I don't really feel any sympathy for Bama fans who had to endure a close game that came down to a 1-point margin of victory. I think a lot of people outside of the Alabama fan base have felt a bit held hostage by Alabama over the last several years, and that's just a testament to how good they've been, how good Nick Saban has been. He's the GOAT. Nobody's taken that away from him. Nobody can deny it. But watching them sweat a little bit gave me a little bit of satisfaction. I'm not going to lie. It was fun to watch. Although I'm glad the SEC came out on top of that one because I don't think I could have tolerated Texas fans or Big 12 fans gloating about that for the rest of the season. It just needs to be said, though, that Alabama did look uncharacteristically beatable, I'd say. Auburn, the Tigers are 2-0 after pretty much just surviving underdog San Jose State 24-16 at home. They're good on the ground, but just struggling in the quarterback position. TJ Finley didn't look great, and although Ashford came in and ran 7 times for 61 yards, he was 1 of 3 for an interception, which is just gross. Personally, I'm not sure that they're ready to take on Penn State this weekend. I'm leaning towards Penn State albeit a close one there at Jordan Hare. It's kind of hard to believe that the Bulldogs at Mississippi State are unranked. Will Rogers threw for 320, 4 TDs, and 1 interception. Defense held Arizona to 40 yards on the ground in a 39-17 win. They just look like a pretty complete team and more than capable of challenging, I think, for that second or third spot in the SEC West behind Alabama and Arkansas. They definitely looked better than Texas A&M, who somehow still sits at number 24. And I'd even argue maybe better than Ole Miss at 20, who is still looking for that starting quarterback headed into SEC play. Ole Miss needs to get that ironed out, I think. Speaking of the Rebels, 59-3 win over Central Arkansas. Okay, fine. they don't even play a real game until Kentucky in week 5. Next week they're 16-point favorites over Georgia Tech, but I think they'll handle that no problem. They're really not going to get tested until they play Kentucky, and until that quarterback position gets decided. It's just tougher for me to be super bullish on Ole Miss. I think it should be Jackson Dart, but Luke Altmaier could still earn those snaps. But I think they're a capable and well-coached team. Lane Kiffin knows what he's doing. I'm not totally sure they've earned that top 20 spot, though, just based on the opponents they've played. LSU proving they can run up the score on little old Southern. Although the defense still gave up 201 yards rushing. We saw Nussmeier throw 2 interceptions and Jaden Daniels come in and throw 3 TDs plus run for another. Other than that, I just don't know how much there is to take away from this game. I think we'll learn a lot more about whether they've improved, how they've improved when Mississippi State comes to play this Saturday. It's a tough test for LSU, and it just so happens to be my game of the week this week. So I'll be putting out my preview on that this Friday, already working on that now. We'll preview the matchup, and I'll give my scores predictions. We'll also take a look at some prop bets, odds, money lines, player props, that sort of thing. Going to close out the Huddle segment with Texas A&M. We're going to talk about this one a little bit longer. On my toilet emoji scale of 1 toilet emoji to infinite toilet emojis, I'm giving them 3 toilet emojis. They probably deserve way more than that. But if Mizzou gets 1, Texas A&M earns at least 3. And like I said, that's probably being a bit kind. Jimbo Fisher has had, 4 years of top 10 recruiting classes. Got his contract extended, including $90 million guaranteed, after a season where they went 4-4 in conference play, and boosters spending millions, presumably, on NIL deals to get players to College Station. And they lost at home to Appalachian State 17-14. I think Aggies fans have every right to be pissed at this. And again, 3 toilet emojis. I saw this floating around on Twitter. I don't know where this originated from. I've seen it in from so many different sources now. Apologies if I don't credit the original source. I know Barrett Sallee tweeted it, and I've seen it in a couple articles since then, comparing Jimbo Fisher's first 50 games to Kevin Sumlin's first 50 games, where I think Jimbo Fisher through 50 games is 35-15. And Kevin Sumlin through his first 50 games was 36-14. And they gave him $90 million guaranteed. Probably, I guess, for just beating Alabama. But man, I just think the expectations have to be so much higher than that in College Station. And Blake Topmeyer wrote in the Tennessean covering this story that, Jimbo Fisher's biggest achievement in college football hasn't happened at Texas A&M. It happened at Florida State. He won a championship at Florida State, parlayed that into the Texas A&M job, and so far has been underwhelming with results on the field. I mean, you can put together top 10 recruiting class after top 10 recruiting class. You can have the best facilities in the world. You can have some of the most passionate fans in the world. You can have boosters spending millions on, resources and NIL deals. But at some point, you have to do better than 8-4 and 500 in conference play. You just have to. So, I don't know what happens this weekend when Miami comes to town. I'm not, pressing the emergency button on Jimbo Fisher yet. I think he's a good coach. They have a ton of talent. That defense could be super legit. But if they play against Miami the way they played against App State, I think fans have every right to crank up the pressure on Jimbo Fisher to produce results. Something's got to give. Either it's players or it's coaching, but you can't just come out year after year and say, well, it's because we're young. It's because we've got so many, 20 or so freshmen out on the football field. When you're recruiting that kind of talent, at some point that talent has to grow up and it has to translate into wins. Let's jump out of the huddle and into my power rankings. Now, these are my personal power rankings. These are not just regurgitations of where each team ranks in the AP Top 25. These are how I think each team in the SEC would rank if they were all to line up and play each other on a neutral field. And we're going to start at the bottom, tied for last place, Vanderbilt and Missouri. And strangely, I'm more optimistic about Vanderbilt than I am about Missouri. They just have too tough of a schedule in the SEC. They got to go to Bama this year. I just think every other team in the SEC, maybe with the exception of Missouri, would trounce Vandy head to head. And then Missouri, after watching last Saturday's performance, the worst team in the SEC could be Missouri. I mean, in year 3 under Eli Drinkowitz, it's painful to watch this team show just no signs of improvement anywhere, offensively or defensively. So at number 11 then, since those two teams are tied, number 11, I'm putting Texas A&M. And to be honest, I would put them dead last if I didn't think they could still beat Mizzou and Vandy head-to-head on any given Saturday. Now remember, this is based on what we've seen up through week 2. They weren't ultra impressive in week 1, even though they blew out an inferior opponent. But then in week 2, they lost to a big-time underdog at home. An L at home to App State is unacceptable for a program of this caliber, just with the recruiting, money, and resources A&M has invested. So for all of those reasons, I'm clocking them in at number 11. One spot up, number 10, LSU. Now, I think LSU has the talent to be a lot better than this, but again, we're just going on what we've seen so far. South Carolina lost to a ranked Arkansas team on the road, but LSU lost in week 1 to unranked FSU in what was essentially a home game. So that's why I'm putting them at number 10. A blowout of Southern really doesn't move the needle much, and I'm putting South Carolina ahead of them at number 9. I think South Carolina will win the games they're supposed to win, and they'll probably lose the games they're supposed to lose. I don't get the sense that they're going to steal a game on their schedule right now. Based on what I saw against Arkansas, I'm not sure they're going to be competitive versus Kentucky. I'm not sure they're going to be competitive versus Tennessee. I'm not sure they'll be competitive versus Florida. That's going to be a revenge game for a lot of those players on this Florida squad. They'll probably get Vandy. They'll probably get Missouri. But most likely looking at 6-6. I don't want to project too much because these aren't projection rankings. I think they have reasons to be optimistic, but they're just nowhere close to contending for the East yet. Coming in at number 8 is Florida. Kentucky exposed the flaws in this Florida team. So I think we can cool it with the Heisman talk. I think we can cool it with the Cam Newton comparison overreaction still lingering around from week 1 for Anthony Richardson. There's still a ton of talent on this roster, but some obvious weaknesses that still need to be addressed. In at number 7, even though I don't think they make it past Penn State this Saturday in a close one, they're still sitting at 2-0. So they're going to come in at number 7, the Auburn Tigers. They need to figure out the quarterback play, but they've got one of the best running backs in Tank Bigsby in the conference. They have the potential. They have the talent. They just need to figure out the play at some of those key positions offensively. Up one at number 6, Ole Miss Rebels. Again, it's hard to know what a team really is when they haven't faced a true challenge. And they won't for another couple weeks still until they play Kentucky, but they're still 2-0. I think they're still a pretty balanced team. They run and throw the ball well. They're well coached. For all of those reasons, I feel comfortable putting Ole Miss at number 6. Ahead of them at number 5, Mississippi State. And Mississippi State could be better than this, but as we get into the higher positions, you'll see why I kind of have them here now. They don't have a top 25 win. They are 2-0. It was a really dominant road win over Arizona. Will Rogers looks great, continues to impress. Bulldogs have a real defense. A lot of other people are talking about how solid that defense is. They did hold Arizona to just 40 yards on the ground. In my opinion, they should be in the AP top 25. And I think, again, game of the week alert here, I think they're really going to test LSU this weekend. Up at number 4, Arkansas. Smash mouth, dominant win over South Carolina. I just don't think South Carolina is as good as a lot of people were hyping them up to be in the preseason. So that's why I have Arkansas clocking in at number 4. Even though, the win versus Cincinnati in week 1 was good, I don't think Cincinnati is as good as they were last year. Preseason rankings, you always have to take with a grain of salt. Razorbacks have a stellar offense, but just a few defensive depth concerns. Think they can probably challenge for that number 2 spot in the West. In fact, I think it's up to everybody else to challenge them for the number 2 spot in the West. But overall in the SEC, I think number 4 is pretty fair based on who they played, what their record is so far. All right, tied for 3rd. I'm going to catch crap over this one, I'm sure, but tied for 3rd, Kentucky and Tennessee. Now, whether we believe that Florida really was the number 12 team in the country, you would have to believe that Utah was really the number 7 team in the preseason. It's still a top 25 win for Kentucky, and it's a conference win. They need the run game to step up, but Will Levis has been playing really great. If Tavion Robinson and Dane Key can step up this season and make big plays for them when they need it, the Kentucky offense can get better. I still don't think they look that great without a run game to balance out what they're doing. I really don't think with the style of ball that Mark Stoops likes to play that's a team he wants to get into a shootout with. We're looking at the Mississippi States, the Ole Misses, the Tennessees there. Really solid defense. I mean, really, really good defense. And they showed that against Florida. But I have them tied with Tennessee because Tennessee went on the road as well against reigning ACC conference champ Pitt, number 17, in Pittsburgh. And I just think when you stack the two teams up, I think Tennessee is just a little bit more balanced. It really could be a coin flip. I think if they lined up and played tomorrow, that game could go either way, but they are going to be in Knoxville this year. Tennessee went on the road and knocked them off in Lexington last year. I'm not factoring that into this rankings, but Tennessee, I think with just as impressive, if not maybe more so, top 25 win on the road there in Pitt to knock off Pat Narduzzi's squad. That's why I have them tied with Kentucky. Both really solid teams, and I think both of them are going to contend for that number 2 spot in the East. Number 2 overall, sorry Alabama fans, but it is Alabama. I think Alabama would win 9 out of 10 times on a neutral field versus the other 12 teams. But that was a close one on the road in Austin. Offensive line concerns. Bryce Young looked like a Heisman candidate, putting the team on his back. And how about the kicker, man? Making some clutch field goals. Alabama's still really good. I don't think they're as good along the line of scrimmage as they were expected to be this year. So for that reason, I have them at number 2, which puts Georgia my overall number one, unquestionably, not just in the SEC, but number one in the country in my book. Until proven otherwise, Georgia is doing everything they're supposed to do. They handled Oregon week one. Whether Oregon was really a top 10 team or not, or maybe top 15 at least, Georgia shut them down. They shut down Samford at home, and they go on the road to South Carolina this weekend, where I think they're going to do it again. Sorry, Gamecock fans. I know Gamecock fans love to reminisce about that 2019 upset, but this is an entirely different Georgia team. I don't think you're going to be so lucky this weekend. Speaking of this weekend, it's time for some predictions. Starting with the early games, number one, Georgia going to South Carolina. Georgia, a 24.5 point favorite. Sorry, Gamecocks, but that's a W for the Dogs. Youngstown State going to number 9, Kentucky. I don't even think there's betting odds for this. Kentucky, unless something completely falls apart. That's a game Kentucky will handle no problem. Abilene Christian going to Missouri. Listen, if Mizzou doesn't win this, Drinkowitz doesn't make it through the season. So Tigers need to get it right. They need to use this game to figure some things out. Number 20, Ole Miss going to Georgia Tech. Now, this is not the triple option Georgia Tech of the days of old. This is a much tamer Georgia Tech squad. Ole Miss is a 16-point favorite and should get the W without much issue here. Pretty big matchup for Auburn. Number 22, Penn State coming into town. I think Jordan Hare's going to be loud. They're going to be noisy. But Auburn's QB play has me just a little less than optimistic. I'm favoring Penn State here in a close one, but you literally just never know with Auburn. Anything can happen. Vanderbilt, good little road test, out of conference for them at Northern Illinois. I'm going to be optimistic here that Vandy gets this W on the road. I think they can do it. I think the odds are close on this one. Vegas has this one within 3, I think. But I'm feeling pretty good about Vandy getting this win. UL Monroe going to number 2, Alabama. I'm surprised there's even betting odds on this game. Bama right now is a 48.5 point favorite. Listen, you do not want to be the team that has to go to Tuscaloosa and play Nick Saban's crew after a weekend like this past weekend. It's going to be a bloodbath. Mississippi State at LSU, game of the week alert. Vegas has this one as a close one, and I'm actually leaning towards Leach's Bulldogs, maybe pulling out the W in Tiger Stadium. I'm going to cover this matchup in my Game of the Week preview that'll be out this Friday. Follow me on Twitter at SEC Recap. You can subscribe to this podcast. I'll put out a companion podcast to go along with that, and subscribe to my Medium so you can get all the write-ups there. Lastly here, Missouri State going to Arkansas. Arkansas should handle them no problem. Akron coming to Tennessee. This is a last tune-up game before Tennessee gets into SEC play. They got Florida coming to Knoxville in week 4. Vol's looking good so far. Need to clean up a few things on offense. They should be able to do that no problem with Akron. South Florida taking on number 18 Florida. Gators should take care of business here in a get-right game before they have to go to Knoxville. They will need Anthony Richardson firing on all 4 cylinders, and they will need to really prepare for that tempo that Tennessee plays at. It's tough to do in a turnaround game. Some people wondering that Florida could be looking ahead to Tennessee here. I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem for them. I think Florida's going to handle South Florida with ease. Finally, number 13, Miami coming to number 24, Texas A&M. Look, I don't know how good Miami is. They only led Southern Miss by 3 at the half, before ultimately winning 30-7. But if Texas A&M plays as lousy as they did against App State, I just can't see A&M competing in the SEC this season. How much longer will fans and boosters tolerate multi-million 8-4 seasons? That's going to do it for today's episode. If you enjoyed this content, please give a follow on Twitter at SEC Recap. Follow me there. Follow my Medium. It's where I put out all of my writings, sec-recap.medium.com. Please like, comment, share. Please rate and review the podcast. I'm doing this as a labor of love. As you can tell, there were no sponsored ads. I'd love to keep this ad-free. If you would like to support the show, you can do that by clicking on the link to my Anchor profile. It's how I distribute my podcast. There's a support button there for just the price of a cup of coffee a week or a cup of coffee a month. We're talking $1 or $2. That would really help me grow the show, spend more time to create the content. We're going to be getting on YouTube here very soon. Like I said, I want to put out content that you want to hear and read. So hit me up on Twitter. Hit up my DMs, leave a comment on the podcast, comment on my articles. Let me know what you want to hear about. It's great to be in the SEC right here on the SEC Recap.